Welcome to Game Set Matchup, the podcast where we talk everything partnerships, the good, the bad, and the ugly.
Welcome to Game Set Matchup, the podcast where we discuss all things partnerships. I'm your host, Greg Watts, and please welcome our guest today, Olivia Minnock, Senior Partnerships Manager at pioneering fintech mmob. Olivia, hello and welcome.
Hi, Greg. Thanks so much for having me. It's great to be here.
Hello, and you've just bought your first new flat, I understand.
I have, yeah. It's been a busy start to the year for me. So far, I've come in and twisted two knobs, and they've both come off in my hand. So there's a little bit of DIY to do.
Olivia, I could say so many things to that, but I probably think it's probably best not to. But good luck with that. So, well, look,
I'll keep you up to date.
Please do. Well, kicking off with an overview and introduction to you, because obviously we know each other pretty well. Perhaps you can tell our listeners a little bit more about who you are, your background, and how did you make the switch from journalism and content to partnerships? Perhaps how do they blend together? Because I think they're a perfect blend.
Yeah, I agree, and I'll share a bit about what I'm doing now first. So yeah, I'm Senior Partnerships Manager at mmob. We're focused on embedded finance and embedded services. So our goal is removing time, cost, and complexity of API and product integration. So that can look like working with credit, payments, wealth, insurance, data products, and plugging those into a variety of different channels, financial and non-financial. So think about going from API documentation, lots of individual coding, to more low-code UX design, deployment in a couple of hours, that kind of thing. So that's mmob. We've been around for about 5 years now, nearly 5 years. I've been in fintech for about 6 years. And yeah, as you say, previously was on the more editorial content and events side. And I moved into partnerships here at mmob 2 years ago. So it's just my anniversary at the time of recording this, actually.
Hey, congratulations.
So yeah, I was kind of part of the fintech ecosystem and very much involved with lots of working with startups. So when I got the opportunity to actually work within a startup itself, I found that really exciting. But this is very much my first role in within a tech company. So getting to grips with that has been fun, as well as my first role that's been much more, commercially partnerships focused, as opposed to before, where there was some commercial elements, but it wasn't the main driver.
How have you? So I'm keen to ask a little bit more about that, because how are you finding it? Because it is. So as a marketing person, I create content. I'm creative. I'm not a was not a journalist, but I was, very heavily involved in content and creativity and all of that stuff. And now I've gone on to become a startup founder. But how did you find the transition? Because it is quite different. But the similarity, I would say, if you agree, is that with content, you truly get under the skin of something, which actually I think is one of the most important elements of being a partnerships person, to truly get under the skin of who they are, what they're looking for, how can you align objectives? Because I actually think it's brilliant training. And what's your thought on that?
Yeah, I think it's really interesting, because when I started the role, a lot of people who knew me from the editorial side, and like you, it was more kind of content than pure journalism, were kind of going, oh, why have you done that? That doesn't make any sense. And you hear people saying things like, oh, my career path's been so squiggly and whatever. But when I listen to people saying these stories, it does make sense, but to them, and it all kind of makes sense in the end. And I always think it only needs to make sense to you and the person who's hiring you, and everyone else can kind of deal with it. So yeah, I think it is about telling the story. It's also about taking something that is very complex and explaining it to people in their language that they understand. So often I'm talking about technology of our solution and different things, but explaining that to maybe someone who's on the commercial side of the business, and seeing, as you say, those opportunities about matching, putting things in context, right? So matching the problems we solve to the different types of companies and use cases we work with. So there's been a lot of that. And also it's just about engaging with humans and talking to people, and have a lot of experience doing that as well.
I think what you just said there, I've never heard before, and that really rings true, which is it's about storytelling, which is it's telling a story to one person or to an audience, or or to a group of people. And to tell that story has to pique their interest. It has to resonate with them. They have to be keen to hear it. and you as the storyteller has to figure out what story to tell. And so therefore that makes absolute sense. You know, that's what you do within content, and that's what you have to do within marketing, and that's what you have to do within partnerships. So actually thinking of partnerships as a storytelling function is really bang on.
Yeah, and I think as well for a company like mmob and many other providers that are behind the scenes, so we're not B2C focused, and if we're doing our job properly, nobody sees us on the outside. And so that's really key, is to think, how can I take something that's happening below the surface and explain it to people and help them to understand what it means to their business.
Well, all I can say is it's very refreshing, because we come across a lot of businesses at Finder who we help, but who perhaps start off by talking about how they're an AI API-powered solution, this or that or the other. But actually, we want to know, what do you do? How can you help me? How do you save me money? What do you cost? Just talk in simple language. And I think sometimes there can be a reticence across all industries, not just fintech, but all industries, in my humble experience, particularly in tech, and particularly from, dare I say it, men, where there can be sometimes a desire to overcomplicate things rather than tell the story using simple, understandable, relatable language.
Yeah, and I think that just comes down to confidence, and it comes down to confidence in your own knowledge and your own product. And so, yeah, it's a bit of a warning sign when people are using as many big words as they can, and jargon, yeah. And if you can't distill it down to tell it to someone else, you maybe aren't understanding it, or there's a bit of smoke and mirrors there. So some of the smartest and most successful people I've come across when I've interviewed people and worked with people have always been able to explain it to someone like me who's not the expert, you know. And I think that's where you can tell a lot about a person and about their company as well.
I think so. A line I often use, I'm sure you use a similar one, is journalists describe us as, and then ... And then when you say that to people, or ask people the question, how would journalists describe you? They take a pause and they think about it, and often they won't be able to answer straight away. But it's a really good technique I found to help businesses really distill in simple language what it is that they do and how they can help. But I guess moving on from storytelling, and we could talk about this for a long time, from content person to content person. I really want to ask, because I know that our listeners will be particularly keen, how have you seen approaches change when it comes to creating partnerships? And what would you say looks like for a gold star partnership for you and mmob?
Yeah, so I think it's really interesting to reflect on how, certainly over the past couple of years I've been there, our partnerships have changed as a result of our technology developing, but also our technology has evolved as a result of some of those partnerships. So as the wider industry is moving on, you know, we've been talking about embedded finance for several years now, but it's not always been fully embedded and integrated. It's not gone beyond the classic payments examples until quite recently. So I think it's really cool to be in a space where we're doing our thing over here, continuing trying to develop our technology as best we can, but the rest of the industry is doing the same in terms of their tech and their strategy and their approach around it. So things do change pretty quick. And then what that means, I think, as we go into more pure, like what we would call embedded finance, partnerships become more ingrained and more long-term. So it's not just like, we'll embed a link in a website and see if we reach some customers, or we'll put a product like an insurance product on a price comparison website. We're now talking to banks, merchants, looking at full scale kind of integrations of products that they don't want to build themselves, but they want to offer their customers. And that requires partnerships that are more, I guess, more embedded, if you don't mind the pun, throughout like both businesses. So it's not just engaging with marketing, sales, or UX design. It's into engineering, into compliance, into all these different companies' wider strategies. So I guess when it comes to how that impacts us, I think with one or two of our partners in particular, it's getting more ingrained into that organization, and maybe they adopted our tech to solve one use case, and then they come to us with different use cases that we wouldn't have been aware of. So I guess all that's to say is that inevitably your technology grows and develops with your partners. And that's what, when we talk about a partnership, that's what we mean. It's less about a vendor-client relationship that you're calling a partnership. And that's what makes it a true partnership, which I'm sure we'll touch on a bit later as well.
You know, yeah, we absolutely will, and could talk for a long time about this. And it's really interesting and wonderful to hear you talk about how mmob are and do evolve with their partners' requirements, and and vice versa. And that's exactly the same for us. We're still fixing the same problem in our case with Finder that we set out to achieve, which is helping businesses discover each other more easily, more efficiently, more effectively. But how we're doing it, it has evolved, and it's evolved based on what our clients want. And I think a lot of, I think that's the hallmark of some of the most successful businesses, like mmob, who are evolving into what their clients want. Because how can you have a product or service as any company and force that to someone who doesn't actually want it? That seems to me to be obvious.
Exactly. And as you've seen at Finder as well, it's who you're doing it for will change as well. And it might not always be the person you thought you were doing it for in the beginning.
Completely. But I do think a lot of businesses can be very rigid and set in their way, say, oh, no, 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 this is what we do. We're not going to do this. And why can't they get it? And I just think sometimes those thoughts can themselves take pause for thought to think, actually, if we were to go down this route, we're not compromising in any way. We're actually growing the business. But no,
and that's a classic startup thing. You'll have that conversation at least once a week where you're saying, you know, our partner wants this. How far do we go in terms of servicing their needs versus making sure that that's going to be scalable as well, which is a really fun problem to have. But I think it's about thinking, these are our current clients' needs, but can we see use cases for that outside of this client and partner? And if so, that's where we can maybe develop something.
Yeah, no, we're the same. We say we go where the demand is, and actually, like mmob, we talk about you know, the different use cases, and then we try to create case studies which validate those different use cases, and then we present them in our channels as those different use cases. You know, this is the problem that we fix. This is how we do it. You can apply it in these different ways. And then that also provokes more thought as well. And people will say, "Oh, could I apply it in this way?" And we're like, "Well, let's explore that together." I think the notion of exploration together is also quite powerful as well, which is what you do really well, rather than forcing.
Yeah, and I think sometimes that's a really interesting one when you're setting kind of KPIs at this stage of a company in terms of your partnerships, sales agreements, etc. The goal is obviously to get as many partners on board as you can and work with as many different people, but the goal can also be to end up not working with a partner and just learning more about your product and where it can be applied. And that has to be a real goal as well.
I think so. I mean, and we'll definitely come back to this. For all the budding partnerships people listening, dare I ask, what advice would you give to your younger self starting out? Perhaps the do's and the don'ts of partnership creation and development. And you talked about a squiggly career before, which I wholeheartedly advocate, by the way, wholeheartedly. What would your advice be?
Yeah, there's a couple of things. So we said earlier about things taking things from previous roles, and one thing I was always told as someone who was moderating, interviewing, etc., is that when you are doing that role, you are representing the audience. So it is your job on that stage or in that publication to ask the question that the audience wants to know, have the audience best interest in mind. When you're in a partnerships role, you work for your company, obviously, and you want the best for them, but you're also representing the partner within your organization, right? So you have to have their interests in mind, you have to advocate for their needs as well and balance all of that out. So that's one of the things that I've taken, I guess, from my previous role. I think also partnerships, as we know, they're very different in different organizations. Some of them are sort of sales in disguise, some of them are more channel partnerships, some of them are more marketing focused, some of them are more tech focused. So I would just say anyone interested in working in partnerships, really read the job descriptions and don't dismiss a certain job title because you don't think you fit into it, but actually get to understand that. And then another thing would be around communication. So if you think about my whole job, my whole career has been communicating, and I've been given great feedback on how I communicate and all that. But even I really struggle sometimes where I overestimate how well I've communicated what we do, and it is a complicated topic. And so you have to always be checking in on that. So, you know, you'll have one meeting and you'll think, that's been brilliant, we've both been on exactly the same page. Then maybe someone goes away for a week, you go away for a week, and you come back and they say, oh yeah, I've told my whole team how this partnership can help us achieve this. And you're thinking, and it's both sides. And so I think never always be double checking and following up and just coming back and making sure everyone's on the same page is always a key thing, especially in kind of more technical conversations.
How do you practically overcome that or kind of solve for that?
Yeah, I think there's a mixture. I think it's getting the right people involved as well. And I think one of the other things is there's such a mix of skill sets needed in any partnership, and recognizing that your role as the partnership manager is to facilitate that, right? So I think some people that I deal with are really hesitant to get their product manager or their tech head of technology or their CTO involved, because they worry that they can slow things down.
Yes.
But the reason they're slowing things down is because they need to get things right and clarify things. So I would say, yeah, I would say first thing, don't be afraid to involve the rest of your team and always keep them up to date on what you're doing, because it's very easy, even in a small company, to like go slightly off-piste with something. So always coming back to that. And also, yeah, I would just say, like, keep following up, keep clarifying what you're saying over email, and just making sure everything's on the same page. And I think as well, like, you get a gut feeling, right? You get this like, oh, I feel like maybe I feel a bit icky about this because someone's not quite on the same page as me. Like, address it straight away, always.
That's, again, wonderful advice. Is our gut feels are, I don't know what the percentage is, but mostly, let's say mostly right. And I think even if they're not right, I think that as a minimum, they're an indication or a sign of something that, you know, ought to be addressed, brought up, gone back to, discussed just one more time. And I think our gut feels are very powerful symbols. And I sometimes think that we ignore them at our peril.
Yeah, 100%. And I think that's another maybe do and don't I have, is like, don't do kind of push for partners that you want to work with if you really think you should be working with a company. But equally, there's that feeling sometimes that you're having to force something. And it's like in any relationship, like if you were trying to date someone and they kept saying to you, I'm going to be a really bad partner for you, maybe listen to them. And it's the same in partnerships. There's been some times where I've thought, I really like this brand, I really like this company, I think we should work with them. And they've been quite hesitant. And then when you lift the lid, you maybe realize there's a mismatch in the tech capability, there's a mismatch in the strategic goals, and that, you know, maybe they were right to begin with, that it wasn't a big priority for either side.
Oh, I couldn't agree more. And I would say with that as well, not a litmus test, because this sounds like I don't do it every single minute and every single day of the week, which I do. But I think that the foundation for any partnership, whether it's personal or work, you know, relationship in your home life or in your work life, has to be trust. And, you know, I think you have to start off on that basis, which is truly understanding what that other partner doesn't want, what they're looking for, what they may not be looking for, like when you're dating, and just asking, you know, exploratory questions and making sure you're on the same page, even though I don't like that particular expression. But if you, and then if you can't, and then once you come across conflict, for example, which invariably you do within any partnership, relationship, personal or otherwise, is actually dealing with it together. And I think if you can navigate conflict together, I think that's a really strong sign of a good partnership as well.
Yeah, definitely.
Well, I suppose coming on to our penultimate question, if I may, having created partnerships for a significant chunk of your career on both sides, as it were, what are your top tips when it comes to creating high-performing teams and winning cultures? Because as you said a moment ago, partnerships in particular and content creation, I think, you know, they're both very much bringing people together.
Yeah, exactly that. And as I said earlier, you shouldn't sort of silo your role as I'm looking after this partnership. So you do want to be working with your counterpart in the other organization to facilitate all of these relationships. So I think the worst thing you can do is put people in boxes in an organization, particularly in a startup. People join startups because they want to be part of a wider business. They don't just want to be in some small little department where they work on their own goals. So I think don't assume just because someone is a technology developer that they don't understand about commercialization, or just because someone is in a sales, they can't input into the user experience and things like that. And I think the best thing you can do is just treat everyone as adults. So having open conversations, having culture, allowing people to have their input. And I think it can be hard. I think one thing, when you're in a commercial role or a partnerships role, things go wrong or you don't reach your targets. And one thing, it's hard to share that with the team. But treating them like adults is really key, because if you're saying on a regular basis, you know, yeah, we were trying to get this partnership off the ground, but there's been some problems. Talk through with everyone, and they might come with different inputs from the product side, from the engineering side, from different parts of the organization, that everyone can support you. So yeah, I would say there's that, like, be very open and transparent, and remember, like, everyone's on the same team, so why wouldn't they want to support?
But it's such good advice. I mean, it really is such good advice about asking a question to someone who you may not have naturally thought would have the answer or have a view, not even the answer, but have a view, because you might be surprised what you hear. Because we are, as you say, we are all adults, we are all human beings, and yes, we all have so-called specialist areas. But why can't we have views into other parts? We all have views on other things within our lives. We might not be specialists in them, like on politics or current affairs or whatever it might be. We've all got views. I think when you're open to listening, and when you ask for opinions and advice, it can be sometimes quite surprising what you get back.
Exactly. And I would extend that always outside your organization, especially again in the startup world where you might be the only partnerships manager in your company or the only whatever else. I always engage with wider networks. So whether that's in the fintech space, but even more broadly, I went to a very general networking event the other day, and everyone will have a different perspective from their previous experiences. So yeah, just take all the feedback from different places if you can get it, but also kind of filter through that as well. Don't just try and take all on board at once and change your whole strategy.
No. I mean, a lovely simple line is, what do you think?
Yeah.
What do you think? What's your take on this? How would you approach this? And as you say that, you get something back, hopefully, and then you disseminate it in the right way. But you might get a little nugget back, a gem, which you might not have otherwise found had you not asked the question. Well, to round us off, if I may, because I could talk for a lot longer, we could share a lot of stories, and there's a lot more questions I could ask you, but I'm very conscious of your time. To round us off, one last question. What does the future hold for businesses when it comes to creating partnerships with each other? And what, if anything, will you and mmob be doing differently?
So I think from a broader perspective in the fintech space, everyone is becoming a lot more intentional with where they spend their time and where they spend their resource. And that's very true of partnerships. So perhaps a little bit more ruthless as well in some ways. So I think over the past few years, and you've probably seen this as well, there's been a lot of badge collecting and marketing and just wanting to have things to announce and talk about and put on your website. And that's still really important because you need to get credibility. As soon as you tell people you're working with one partner, they think, okay, you guys are a real company. Excellent. So I get that from the early stage perspective. But I think that does always take up a lot of time and doesn't always benefit in the long term. So I think now it's about businesses taking a step back and saying, if we don't announce a new partnership for 6 months, that's okay. Because when we do, it's going to be something really thoughtful. We're going to have built something out. We're going to be, really clear that this aligns with our goals. So I think businesses in general are coming to that space. And I think for us, a lot of our kind of targets and partners were fintechs. And focused a little bit more now on enterprises, especially banks at the moment, which brings a new set of exciting problems and challenges. But we found that while they are perhaps slower to engage, they're now, again, much more intentional. So I think, we're talking to people we spoke to 2 years ago, and banks are very good at this. They'll kind of watch fintech and they'll watch the market, and they won't necessarily jump into anything. But they're kind of coming back around in that cycle now, and they're saying, we do have a strategy for embedded finance now. We do have budget. We do have things we want to do. Can you support us? And they kind of know they need to partner as well. So that's exciting for mmob. We also will look at different types of partnerships. So we're partnering with cloud providers, for example, and their marketplaces. That's going to be a key piece for us, which again enables a lot of the work we do with institutions. And also excitingly, we're kind of developing more self-service offerings as well. So we'll start to probably tier partnerships, and we will have that kind of vendor-client relationship in one place, and then more involved partnerships that are more consultative in other places. And then my resolution is focusing on what I'm good at. So that's my general resolution for the year, similar to mmob, focusing on what we do best as well. But I think it's about not thinking you have to know everything all the time. And as I say, bringing in other people from the team. So I think, it's always tempting. You always think you should be filling in gaps in your knowledge. And I did do a course in product management earlier in last year, which was really helpful because I work with product managers. I partner with product managers. So I think it's respectful to understand what their role is. But you don't have to become the expert in everything. You need to become the expert in what you're bringing, and just bring in other experts where you can. So that's something I'm gonna focus on.
I think I think that kind of helps us to wrap up nicely around your piece around squiggly careers, which I think is a very underrated philosophy, which is you don't, yes, be an expert in one or two things, but having an awareness of other things, whether that's taking roles in different industries throughout your career, taking, secondments in different areas, and just moving around a little bit, because by the time you reach a certain age or a certain point, actually you become quite, well-rounded, in my opinion. And to your point earlier around some hiring managers that don't get that, who would rather hire people that have stuck onto linear paths within the same industry, within the same types of role, that's fine. But I think equally the hiring managers and the organizations that get the benefits that a more rounded individual that's got perhaps a bit more of a smattering of experience across different disciplines, I think is quite beautiful. And that's the career that I decided to take. But as you said earlier, those that get it, those that don't, perhaps don't.
Yeah,
but
exactly.
and that's fine. That's fine. Well, Olivia, maybe you could come back and join us in a few months' time, and we can perhaps go back and look at how mmob has evolved and grown even further. And you yourself would love to kind of check back in the next few months if we may. But you've been a wonderful guest as always. Thank you so much for your brilliant advice and experience and tips when it comes to creating partnerships. We wish you all the best, and we'll look forward to catching up with you very soon.
Yeah, thank you very much, and looking forward to seeing which kind of use cases Finder is exploring over the next year as well.
Oh, I have a feeling we're going to work more closely together somehow. There could be an mmob and Finder use case. Who knows? Well, thank you for joining us on Game Set Matchup, and speak to you soon.
Thanks.
Bye, bye, bye.
Thanks for joining this week's Game Set Matchup. Tune in to hear more about the need to knows and the do's and don'ts when it comes to creating successful business partnerships.